Hello, this is Mike at GameFromScratch, and today we're going to be taking a quick hands-on look at the new release of Visual Studio 2017 release candidate. Now, Visual Studio was previously known as Visual Studio Next, and then Visual Studio 15, and now it has been rebranded to Visual Studio 2017, and today they released a release candidate of it. Now, a release candidate means that it's coming soon. This isn't an alpha, this isn't a beta, it's a little bit beyond that. This is very close to a final release product. So, obviously, it's not a full release. You should not be using Visual Studio in production code yet, but this is going to be much more stable than a typical beta would be, for example. So we're going to take a look at it from the perspective of a game developer. We're not going to go incredibly deep. Obviously, it was just released, and I've got no experience with the prior betas, so my hands-on it's going to be literally be the first few minutes of using it. We're also going to take a look at some of the new features and functionalities in this new release of Visual Studio, specifically with a slant towards what it means for game developers. Now, the reason why all of this is happening is right now, Microsoft is having their Connect conference, Connect 2016, and there's been a lot of announcements out of that. They released a quote-unquote version of Visual Studio for the Mac OS, which is also basically a rebranded version of Xamarin Studio. But, you know, if you're a C# or F# developer on Mac OS, I guess that's good news for you, but it's not full-blown Visual Studio. This is full-blown Visual Studio we're talking about today. And if you're wondering if there's a community edition available, aka the free version for people that make less than $1 million or $2 million bucks, yes, there is. So if you're currently using the free license, you're still continuing possible to use said license. Now, in order to come and grab it, you can see here we're at the Visual Studio 2017 RC page. And this leads you over to the downloads page. The downloads page is at www.visualstudio.com/downloads. And instead of downloading any of these are all going to be your production versions. You want to scroll down a little bit and grab the Visual Studio 2017 RC. Now, if you're watching this some point in the future and full Visual Studio 2017 is out, that is obviously what you want to grab. The release candidate is only for the interim. So if there's a newer version available, by all means, grab that version. Now, there's a couple of options here. You can do an offline installation of it, which basically is download the entire ISO, or you can do a web download. I'm going to go ahead and do the web download, and you'll see here it comes down. The basic installer is 800K. And don't think for a second that that is the extent of the install. It's going to be a couple of gigs. I hope you have a decent internet connection to continue. But one of the big things about this Visual Studio product, and something I want to see and show you today, is they cleaned up the installer. And I have to say thank God for this, because the previous installer was garbage. Now, I have Visual Studio 2013 and 2015 currently installed on my machine. And I'm actually going to get rid of both of them. I haven't found myself using either of them yet. I've been using Visual Studio Code for lighter weight projects, and I'm hoping that this release candidate is functional enough, or at least when 15 or 2017 releases, I can get rid of both these. But one of the big problems with the original Visual Studio is, well, here's my install. See all this crap? Visual Studio 2013, Visual Studio 2015, Visual Studio for Apache, Cordova, XNA redistributable, 2015 tools for Unity, 2010 Office redistributable, 2015 redistribution, 2013, 2010, 28, 28, 28, 28, 25, CLR types for SQL, SQL Server, SQL blah, 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 other SQL, different SQL, different SQL, different SQL, Silverlight, etc. Help viewer, Microsoft.NET, various, blah, 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 blah. What is all this crap? Well, basically, this is all the garbage required to install Visual Studio 2013 and 2015. And even worse, or slightly more insidious, when you look behind the scenes. So you come into, I think it's app data. Let's go find it. Where's my percent? There we go. App data percent. You will notice in here, we also have some rather large files. So I'm going to come down here to Microsoft. And, oh, you know what? I went ahead and deleted them because they were just taking up so much space. But under the Visual Studio install here, there was another something like 8 gigs worth of things installed. Things like Android SDKs, etc. So Visual Studio 2013 and 2015 installed a lot of crap. Now, don't get me wrong. It did a lot of crap too, but you couldn't differentiate, you know, what pieces were needed versus what pieces you wanted. For example, you would think to yourself, well, I'm not doing database development. I don't need SQL Server installed. Well, yes, you do, actually, because it's the underlying engine for IntelliSense, for example. So they created this convoluted bloatware of just the gigantic install. Each one of these installs is like 10 to 20 gigs in size. And one of the big things they've done with Visual Studio 2017 is try to consolidate all this together. So I'm going to be just so happy to get rid of all this crap off of my machine. And that is part of this install. So we see the installer continued on. So this is the web installer. And the nice thing is the web installer is also only going to download what we want, which again is perfect. So do I want to do Universal Windows platform development? Universal Windows basically being their common runtime for doing Xbox, Windows, Windows Mobile, etc. development altogether. What the hell, I'll get that. .NET, desktop, sure, I'll probably do that. C++, yes, I want that as well. Web, yeah, what the hell. Azure, nah. Python, nah. Node, sure. Data, no. Data science analytics application, nope. .NET Core and Docker, sure. Those are new. We'll look into it. Now, there's some really interesting things they've done here. Is we've got mobile development with .NET. So you want to do iOS, Android, or Windows Mobile using Xamarin Tools. You click here. I'm not going to install this. This actually results in quite a bit of stuff being downloaded. But you'll notice over here, especially for interest of game developers, is you've got the Unity tools built in. So yeah, I'll go ahead and install those. Mobile development with JavaScript. Now this is getting a little confusing because I picked mobile development with .NET. Don't care about .NET. I do care about JavaScript. So we'll pick that one. Mobile development with C++. Interesting. So do I want to develop iOS, Android, or Windows applications using C++? Sure, we'll take a look at that. And then down here we've got a game development with C++. Now this is actually built with either working with DirectX SDK or the Cocos 2D framework. I'll download it just to see exactly what you get. But you can see, nice thing here is you can just grab and use the exact pieces you want and nothing more. And here's one that's really interesting. Linux development in C++. You want to create Linux developments directly on your Microsoft Windows machine using Visual Studio++? You can. And hell, let's put those on there. We'll see what happens. And then over here, I'm just going to change my path. My D drive is substantially larger than my C. And you'll see this result in a 30 gig install. So, not the tiniest by any means. I wonder if any of the stuff that I don't really need makes a huge difference. Yeah, so you see there, that C++ mobile development is installing the Android NDK, the various iOS requirements, etc. I'm still curious enough to see what it does, so I will keep that basically 11.5 gigs of size there. I don't actually care about ASP.NET Core, so let's see what that does for space. Nothing. Okay, I still don't care. So once you're ready, go ahead and click Install, and your download is going to occur. Now this is day one of this launch. Who knows how hit their servers are. I'm actually on a fairly fast download. I have a 1 gig connection here, but I still expect this is going to take several moons. So I'm going to pause it. It is now 2:21, and we will see where we are in a couple of minutes. So I will see you soon. So while we're waiting, it might be a good time to do a quick run through of some of the key features in this particular release by going through the release notes. Now, I want to make it clear, I'm only skimming the surface. I'm only showing stuff that I think will be of direct interest to game developers specifically. And even then, I'm sort of just skimming over the topic here. These release notes are huge. There's a whole lot of new functionality. So I'm just going to highlight some of the ones that really caught my eye. If you want more details, do be sure to go through the full release notes for it. I will link this down below. But in this release, we've got some definite improvements that they're going to really make your life better. Now, the first one we saw was the new installation experience. We already seen this one in action, and this is worth the cost of admission in and of itself, in my humble opinion. So a lot more control how the install works, and another thing is the install works a lot cleaner, so less on installation. You can make things much smaller. You only get what you need. You only pay for what you need, which is nice to see. Now, another thing that they've done, and this is kind of across the board, is they've actually just done improvements such as improve the speed of opening project files, improve the speed of C++ IntelliSense parsing, and made it so that solutions can light load so that you don't, crash down under the weight of having a really large solution file with a number of embedded solution or project files in it. So a lot of this particular release is around the idea of making Visual Studio more performant, which is exactly what I want to see, because of stuff like this. Visual Studio has been optimized to reduce startup time and load solution times. The very first launch of Visual Studio is at least 50% faster. That is what I wanted to happen, because Visual Studio 2015 was turning into a bloated pig. And if you read through these release notes in a lot of detail, you'll see that over and over and over again. Work to improve speed, improved speed, change the thing to improve speed. So that's nice. Across the board, you should just see better performance. And we'll see that when we get finished installing. Now, we go down, the start page has been updated. So when you get in, you can turn off the getting started. You can collapse down the developer news. So your end page will end up looking somewhat like this. Improved code navigation. They've added the go to, lets you quickly find and go to files, types, methods, and other elements in your code. One-stop way to go to any kind of item you need, even in large code bases. You can also filter them down, which is very, very cool. That filtering is going to be a common concept here. There is now find all references has been overhauled. Also now provides advanced groupings, filtering, sorting, searching within search reference results, and colorization for results in C# or VB projects only. So basically, your find all references is infinitely more useful. It was kind of, give you too much results and they weren't that useful before. So this is one of those things I'm really going to like. Structured guidelines are now drawn in the editor so that you can easily visualize the structure of code that you are working on, as you can see here. New extensibility format and options that go there. You can now modify extensions in bulk. NGen support. You can now install assemblies using NGen. Install files outside of extension directory, and roaming extension manager. So extensibility is now cleaner, more performant, and easier to manage, which is definitely nice. Perhaps my single favorite feature beyond the new installer, though, is Open Folder. Open Folder is one of those workarounds where Visual Studio kind of sucked before. So say you had a simple directory with a JavaScript project in it. Most editors, including Visual Studio Code, Sublime Text, Notepad++, etc., most of the common code editors will treat a project as a directory. With Visual Studio, you always needed a VS project or a CS proj or an SLN file or something, some parent level thing, so they knew what the hell it was dealing with. Now you can just say open folder, and it will open it, as you can see here, like it's a solution. And even more so if it is one of these things. So if it's a CMake project for C++, a Node project for JavaScript or TypeScript, Python, C# or VB project, it will also treat it like a project. That means if you hit F5, you can run or debug your code, for example. So you no longer need to go in and create superfluous project files to manage this stuff. And this is going to be nice, especially when you're working on, cross-platform or, trying to bring in code that wasn't created in the Visual Studio ecosystem. Nice, great little features. There's the lightweight solution load I talked about earlier. Enables faster loading of large solutions. Well, substantial improvements in solution load time and memory usage feature is not enabled by default. But that was one of those areas where Visual Studio was really starting to get creaky. If you had a large enough solution, it got painfully slow and used a hell of a lot of RAM. This is another one of those things that impresses the hell out of me. Now, a big part of what's happening at Connect right now is Microsoft outreach to various other platforms. Like they just announced SQL Server is running on Linux. They've joined the Linux Foundation. Google has joined the Microsoft.NET Foundation. Like the world is a very strange place today. A lot of openness and democratization going on. And this is sort of symbolic of all of it. Language support inside of Visual Studio is really impressive now. We've got C++, C#, Go, Java, JavaScript, PHP, TypeScript, and Visual Basic are all first-class languages with all kinds of... And then we've got some other languages that have support for everything except for the new Navigate 2 functionality. So basically you get syntax colorization, auto-completion, and code snippet support. And this is also includes Groovy, HTML, Java, Javadoc, Lua, Perl, PHP, R, Ruby, ShellScript, Swift, and XML. And then we've also got syntax colorization and autocomplete support for just about every other programming language. So now you get full text completion and syntax highlighting for just about every single programming language under the sun in Visual Studio out of the box. Very, very cool to see. Now I'm going to skip over a lot of the server-specific stuff. It's not of interest to most of us. Most of you aren't working with ASP.NET or Azure. So I'll skip over some of that stuff. But obviously you can jump in here if it is of interest to you. This one's a neat little quickie debug feature. Before, you used to have to set, temporary breakpoints if you wanted to jump to a certain spot over and over again, but not enough to actually create a breakpoint for it. You can now turn on debug options, enable run to click to get this little guy in the sidebar, which will now just jump your code forward in the debugger to that particular point. I'm not sure where this goes between this and run to cursor, but I think this is just an easier way. It's more of a it's there until you get rid of it type thing. It's like a quickie breakpoint, I guess. Now, these two are definitely nice, especially if you've ever done any development where your code is hosted in other code. For example, if you're creating an extension for, say, the Godot engine, you'd compile your code, you would run it in the Godot editor, but your code would probably be a DLL that runs inside of it. So what you had to do every time you ran it was attach to the process. And there's been 2 improvements in attach to process, which will make your life infinitely nicer. First off, now you can filter down. If you go to your task manager at any particular time, you probably have a crap load of processes. So filtering through them was annoying. Now you can come in, put in a couple letters so if you were looking for Godot, you could type GODO, and it would only give you the processes with GODO in there, make it quick to jump to it. The next one up is once you have connected to it once, you can automatically reattach the process. Now, they're both kind of smallish features, but if you are if you've worked with attached to processes in the past, you will know how much of a workflow saver these 2 functionalities are actually going to grant you. Also, we've got better exception handlers. You can see the benefits of the new exception handler in this post if you want more detail. But basically, debugging exceptions in Visual Studio 25 was a pain in the ass, especially if you had nested exceptions, and made it almost useless. So if your exception was thrown by another exception, trying to get that detail out of there was not fun. Now it is a modal-less box, so you can resize it, you can pin it, you can change it however you want, and you can also debug into the underlying exceptions. So it makes exception debugging a whole lot easier. At the same time, there are now conditionals, so you can only respond to exceptions that were thrown from a specific module. So for example, if you wanted to debug exceptions that were coming from myplugin.dll and only myplugin.dll, you can now do so. Let's see, what else do we got here? Diagnostic tools support. So actually, that's nothing of interest. But what is probably interest is new profiler options. So under the CPU usage tool, better external code support. CPU tool now gives you better insights into the cost of library and framework functions when called by user code, and a function view that ranks the function cost by their CPU cost. So when you are trying to figure out why your code is running so damn slow, CPU usage tool is now going to be much handier. We got Chrome debugging support, ASP.NET process. Projects run in Chrome as you can now debug your ASP.NET code in the Chrome browser. Now there's some language specific extension or improvements. Again, I'm not going to go into a lot of these in detail, but basically Visual C++ has seen improvements. Now, one of the nice big improvements they've done, and I kind of touched on this earlier on, is they switched the underlying database system behind Visual Studio Code to using an embedded version of the database. So this should result, where is the actual description? Here we go. New SQLite database engine is now being used by default. This will speed up database options like go-to definition and find all references, and will significantly improve initial solution parse time. So when you loaded up a Visual Studio project for the first time, it was slow while it was compiling the IntelliSense database, etc. This will all be much, much faster, which is nice to see. We've improved IntelliSense performance on projects and files not using precompiled handlers. Again, this is a common trend. We've improved performance, and that's what I want to see, because like I said, Visual Studio 2015 was a nice IDE, but it was also a bloated pig, so they're moving in the right direction in my opinion. Another big thing that they've done here, so they've done obviously across-the-board improvements to the STL implementation, but the biggie for C++ developers is going to be these lines right here. Enhanced support for C++ 11 and C++ 14 features, as well as preliminary support for certain features expected to be in the C++ 17 standard. Support for generalized const expression and NSDMI for aggregates. The compiler is complete for features added in the C++ 14 standard. So, and then the gotcha. Note the compiler still lacks a few features from the C++ 11 and 98 standards, but it is C++ 14 compliant now, with some support for C++ 17 functionality. Notable improvements include improved code generation of loops and improved code security. So, again, nice improvements across the board. IDE speed improvements, filtering down in your details. Again, this filtering stuff is pretty much across the IDE, and it's nice to see. And then we get into, we saw this a little bit earlier. There are now specific C++ installations, so C++ for Linux, C++ for game development, C++ for mobile development. We saw that as part of the installation process. Clang now supports big ob switch, and then we're going to kind of get into real specifics here. C++ and VB support have been improved. Generally, it's new refactoring and code editing functionality. Things like simplify object initializers with an initializer, so you can see automatically go from old to new, which is nice. Basically, it's just new code functionality, support newer C# 7 style features. Also got the again, a lot of it's smaller implementation specific stuff. I'm not going to go into a whole lot of detail. F# improvement included F# 4.1 language features, Python improvements. R is now available as the data science workload. I've never used R, so no comments from me here. JavaScript, TypeScript has been updated to 2.1 release candidate. JavaScript language service is available, enabled by default. The new service uses TypeScript definition files to improve IntelliSense and includes IntelliSense support for JS.comments, annotations, CMake script 6, and common JS module formats. XAML tool improvements. New tools for universal little app development. And for mobile developers, there's some cool stuff in here for Apache Cordova. Cordova Simulate. So you can see a new browser-based simulator enables you to load code fast, see the results immediately, like so. You can set various features such as GPS simulation, device compass. So really kind of a cool way of virtualizing a mobile device for HTML5 development. Support for iOS and Xcode 8 development. Another cool thing is there's actually a iPad simulator, so you can actually run your code, your iOS code in an iOS simulator on Visual Studio. Very cool stuff. Xamarin Preview, NuGet support. So Visual Studio 2017 includes NuGet 4.0 release candidate. Developer analytics tools, Team Explorer, again, SQL Server data tools, Office tools, Visual Studio SDK, Azure SDK. Those are very project specific, I suppose. The Node.js tools for Visual Studio, basically create a great Node.js development environment directly inside Visual Studio. Visual Studio tools for Unity have been included. We'll look at those in a second. .NET Core, we're not really going to get into that, and then your known issues. So that's a big top level of the new functionality in Visual Studio, especially as it is relevant to game developers. But as you saw, there is a lot of little refinements and improvements. But again, and I know I'm beating this drum a little too loudly, but the nicest thing I'm seeing, and let's hope it bears out when this installation is done, is those focuses on improvements for project parsing, management, etc. And I love the fact that you can now treat a file like a project. So that was a quick look at the functionality features in this new release. Now let's jump into the IDE itself. Okay, so our installation is finally done. Now if you happen to be paying attention, and you notice down here in the time, it appears this installation took quite a long time, and that isn't actually the case. Today I learned a very valuable lesson. Do not install software and do a video capture at the same time where your drive has very little space left. It kind of came together as a perfect storm and caused my installation to fail, my video recording to crash, and pretty much my day to get bad. Obviously I restarted the installation, continued it on as it is. Now I can't put that one on Visual Studio, that was my own stupidity. So I did a fresh install again. In the end, it took about probably 20 minutes for the install to actually finish. So this is the screen you'll be presented with when you are done. First, we're going to look at a couple things. First, we're going to look at the launch speed of Visual Studio itself, the initial welcome screen. Then we're going to look at a Unity project, and then finally we're going to look at that file open for a C++ project. And that's about it. To be honest, Visual Studio looks a whole lot like Visual Studio did. You're not going to be wowed by changes to the IDE. It's a very similar experience. So you can go ahead and launch it using this guy here. This is just your post-install screen. You can shut that down if you want. And as you can see, Visual Studio startup speed is improved quite a bit. It was started to, like I said, turn into a bit of a bloated, stuck pig. So this is several times faster than my old Visual Studio 2015 install. I like to see that. And here's your initial launch screen. Of course, this is where your recent projects are going to show up. You can create new projects from templates. You can grab new templates down here, or you can do your various different opens. So project solution, folder, or website, and this is really just the same thing as going up file open. And other than that open folder, everything is the same as it was. You've got your developer news over here that you can now cascade out, and you've got your getting started. And once you've got started, you can just get rid of that crap. So it's a much cleaner start page, of course, and you can get rid of it as well if you wish. But Visual Studio itself is looking very much like Visual Studio always has. And now let's go ahead and take a look at an example from Unity. This is a Unity project that one of the defaults, the space shooter or whatever project. And I'm just going to go ahead and open this project up in Visual Studio. Now I configured it and told it where msdev is actually located, so it knows how to do this, or sorry, devenvironment.exe. So it does know what to load. But this is the process of once you've got those Unity tools installed, getting Unity to run is this simple. So just open in Visual Studio, and here you go. We are now running inside of Visual Studio, and some very cool stuff here. So here's the code, for example, on called for the update for our player controller. And if I want to go ahead and extend, this is one of the pieces. So a couple of the new pieces of functionality. You can see the guidelines now that show you your different indentations. I can go ahead here and now do, this is Unity tool specific, but I can do implement Unity messages or quick implement. And if I go ahead and do this, you can see all of the various different pieces of Unity, you know, the different callback methods that you can implement here. So if we want to do on collision enter, we can click there, we can pick the API level, and this will give us the options that are available for that given API level. Have it generate a method comment on become visible, and OK. And that will stub in our code and put on visible. And, you know, it's fluff, but it's useful fluff, especially if you're learning Unity right now and you don't necessarily know all those messages by heart. But for example, say we're in our code, we got our update here. Go ahead and I'm just going to set a breakpoint on that line. Over mouse. All right, there we go. So we got a breakpoint set. You'll see up here we got attached to Unity. A couple of other options are available if we drop that down. Attached to Unity, we'll go with attached to Unity and play. This will fire up Unity's version. Theory. Come on. All right, that and play isn't working that well. So go ahead and continue. Hit control. We're not hooked up right. Let's go on back here. Hit play. I must have just missed the button. All right, so now we're going to invoke it in Unity. Unity should automatically come up. There we go. So now it's running. I'll shoot, and there you see our breakpoint is hitting. The only other thing I can really show you here is exception handling, the new exception handler, but a bit beyond what we're going to cover today. Another thing we could do, remember earlier I said you could go and detach, so let's, so you can attach the Unity debugger this way, click there, and you can see the running instances of Unity. So if you had multiple versions of Unity running, this may not work the way we did it. But the other thing we could do is go to debug, attach to process. So this is where that new functionality is. And now, like I said earlier, there is the ability to filter down and get to that exact process you want. And then once you've done this once again, there will be like another attached to process. Now this is going to be a special case in Unity because Unity has, like the Unity tools for Visual Studio kind of have some of the helpers to make this process easier. So this in-process debugging is generally for, you know, other applications that don't necessarily have this behavior baked in. But it's definitely nice to see. A couple other things we can, let's get rid of you. Trying to think. The IntelliSense is pretty much the same as it was. A lot of the difference is speed. You're not going to see a huge difference here because C# speed has always been pretty good for the IntelliSense. But you can see, at least in my experiences, these things are actually quite a bit smoother. Not sure what other functionality. Quick actions and refactoring. Oh, no, that's not that element. All right. So that is an example of running with the new Unity tools, the C#. You see it is pretty quick. I find that in general, the whole IDE is running, you know, nicer, faster than it was before. Switch between files. Let's see, let's close down that project and open it back up. I don't want to save any of you. So there's our our recent, and boom, back in. And that is probably about 100 times faster than it used to be for me. So I'm definitely impressed by that. The next thing I want to show is this open in file thing. Now, as a good example is we're going to go ahead and get a version of SFML. Now, the nice thing about SFML is it's a C++ project built around CMake. And getting CMake to work on Windows can be a bit of a trick. So this is going to be a nice demonstration. So first thing we need to do is go ahead just to the SFML site and get the git URL. Now let's go back to our command line. And we will go git clone and then use that URL. So all we're doing right now is downloading the most recent source code for the SFML library. Now, if you've never heard of it, SFML is popular, stands for Simple Fast Media Library. It's a cross-platform C++ based game engine or game framework. And there you can see it. Now it is checked out and done. Now we're going to go back to the Visual Studio and we'll close down our project. So close solution. And now instead we're going to do an open folder. Now this is one of those examples where we no longer need to actually have a project file or a solution set up. And this really demonstrates how nicely it works. So we're just going to navigate to where we downloaded. So that SFML folder right there and go ahead and select it. Now this is a C++ project, but there's no project available yet. This is just going through. You can see down here it's scanning the data. And it's doing a very, very fast job of it too, based off of what it used to do for C++ type files. I don't know why I've made this window so big. And it was parsing the IntelliSense for the various different projects. We'll bring that down. So let's go on in and see if our IntelliSense source is working. So here is sound. As you can see, all the include files resolved. So here we are inside of sound. And let's see if IntelliSense is working. Boom, it is. So we have no project file at all. We literally just downloaded this file and opened it as a folder, and it is just magically working. Now this is where it gets a little sloppy, at least, and this is probably me, user error stuff. I don't use CMake stuff. And what I'm disappointed with, if I go to build, no build option. If I go to debug, no start option. So I can't just do F5 debugging on this particular project, and I'm not really sure exactly how it works. But what I find is if you go to the CMake file, so CMake list.txt, you can right click that guy and then click build. And you'll see down here in the output, this is invoking the compiler, and we are at the process of actually going ahead and building this project as we speak. And you know, it's a fairly small library, and you're gonna get a good sense of how fast the C++ compiler is here, because this is not going to take long by any definition of the word. But that is a project that we didn't touch in any manner whatsoever. We literally just downloaded it from GitHub and evoked it with file open. This is a really cool feature, and it makes this stuff so much more accessible. Now, what I do find a little strange is the output folder. So you'll see the build is done. We just successfully downloaded and built SFML, and that was about 20 times faster than I've ever done that in my life. Normally you have to do some, well, you have to run CMake, make the Visual Studio project files, open those project files, do the build from there, etc. This, boom, down in, works, done. Now I should do full caveat though. I also tried this with Atomic Game Engine, which is a little bit more complex, and it crashed C++ or Visual Studio 2017 RC 3 times. So I kind of gave up on it and switched to SFML as my example too. So do expect some warrants. But this file open is awesome. So if you're working with a node project, you can just open the directory and it figures out what to do. A CMake project, same deal. Now another thing to keep in mind is you've also got syntax highlighting and IntelliSense, etc. support for a number of new languages. Remember R, Rust, Go, etc. So you're also going to have much broader language support than you're used to in the past. But the tools work pretty much the same as they were. We had a couple of other options. Shoot, I should have shown this one when I had the other project open. I may open it back up in a second. The new debugging functionality, the jump to. Never mind. But the tools are pretty much the same as they were. There's just nicer find. So if we do, again, let's go and do the find, edit. Find references is what it. All right, how do I evoke that in just a sec? Find all references. So we're going to find all references of the SF namespace, and this used to get so polluted. You know, see, we've got many references. So now we've also got those abilities to. Is it still running? Let me change the grouping. Where is my filtering? There we go. All right, how do I add a filter? I don't remember. You can filter into this. All right. I'm making for a bad demo here. We'll just skip on from that. Now, one thing I do want to point out that I did find from this process is this. My default build directory when I did this was here, which is very, very, very strange. So you see it's installing it into app data local. So this is where the build for your CMake file ended up coming. And I'm not a big CMake guy, so I don't know why it ended up here. There's your end result. So there you can see SFML built for you. I just don't know why it ended up here, but it might be one of those things you run into as the trick there. And again, there's so much more small refinements to this particular release. I'm not going to go really into much detail on any of those. I just kind of wanted to show you the top level of what is in here. And I have experienced in my couple hours of playing with this guy a few crashes. Like I said, I saw some crashes when I was trying to do Atomic Game Engine. But for the most part, it hasn't been too bad. And for the coding experience itself, the coding side of things, I have found just been across the board improved speed. So even if it's a lot like Visual Studio 2015, it's a lot different too. And the fact that it's not so bloated, not so sluggish, it's definitely a faster version of Visual Studio. And that's what it needed to be because it was getting downright fat. And I do like to see this, the speed here of the IntelliSense. It is definitely much nicer that way. And then we also do, again, have these filters that are available everywhere, so we can filter down to just the functions, for example. This filtering, the new level of filtering, is definitely a nice feature. Now, there's obviously a ton more in here. You know, we can get into the various different projects we could do. So we now have the cross-platform stuff is built in here. We can get into the Cordova testing, so you can actually test your web applications directly in Visual Studio, but I could end up going on for hours and hours and hours to get into these specific things. But you'll see here your different projects you have. So I can come in here, I could create Android, hell, I can make Android Wear applications. I can make an OpenGL game using C#, so that's a Xamarin project right there. Or I can go over to Visual C++ and create cross-platform Android, so I can create a C++ based no game option. Oh, that's odd. But I can create an application built around using Android and Gradle, for example, or I can create an iOS application directly using C++ in the editor. Ditto, I could probably create iOS over here. So Apple Watch apps. This is tying into Xamarin or iPhone apps. So if I wanted to create an iPhone game in Visual Studio, it's that simple. SceneKit game demo here. We'll go ahead and create that and done. Good test for our speed as well. So here we are creating this new cross-platform, well, not cross-platform, I guess it's iOS only app. Don't want to open you. I don't want to set up a remote connection to my Mac. All right, so you still have dependencies. I don't know if I can get away with not doing that. Crap. So the only way we're going to actually be able to build this cross-plat is if we actually hook up to a Mac, I believe. So let me see what actually happens if I go ahead and do a build. Because that might be debug only or deploy only. So let's see what happens for the build. Yeah, so I can do the build. I just can't disconnect from Mac agent. So the main assembly was compiled. Connect to a Xamarin Mac build agent to build the full application. So sadly, it looks like we can't do remote. I wonder if I can do, yeah. So you actually need to hook up to a Mac to get away with that one. But let's go back and do an Android example instead. So new project, let's see, Android, OpenGL game, done. You know, this is a lot faster. I am actually quite impressed with the speed increases here. So it's gone ahead and create it. Let's see, what do I have up here? I have an Android 6. It looks like for Cordova. Let's see if I go ahead and run that, what it does. We'll come over here. We can see the C# code for an OpenGL style game. It's doing something. firing up Android emulator. Android emulator has never been a fast experience. Let's see what it actually does with it. But I have to admit, that is a pretty seamless process for actually going ahead and creating another platform's app. I wonder if I installed the Linux tools too. Oh, it's busy. Won't let me continue. Yeah, Android emulator loading is just as obnoxiously slow as it has always been. Now, I don't know why I picked the ARM version. That was my own stupidity. I should have done the x86 version, but still. You'll see in the background here, though, it went ahead, it did the build, it called its own version of the JDK. All right, it should be running now, I think. Dun, dun, dun. Maybe not. Okay, this is excruciatingly slow. I'm going back to pausing. And after much waiting, here is our application running on the Android emulator. So that was really not on Microsoft at all. That's just the way the Android emulator is. But here you can see your application, Android application, being developed in Visual Studio. I don't know, pretty cool actually. C++ application, oh no, this is a C# application I created here, but entirely done in Visual Studio. Now the cool thing is you actually can go up here, and after waiting all that time for this guy to load, let's just kill it, can come on up here and you'll see we've actually got tight integration with all the Android and iOS tools. So you can see here we've got, we can access the SDK manager, so if we needed to add a tool to the Android SDK, there it is. And the cool thing is this actually picked up my existing Android SDK install instead of actually going ahead and creating its own or a new one, which is nice to see. So really that's kind of it, surface level stuff I want to talk about here. There's a ton of stuff built into this actual release, but if I got into all of it, we'd be looking at about 9 hours long in this video and getting progressively less and less interesting. So I'm going to cut it off right there. I definitely recommend you check this guy out. I would probably wait. It's release candidate, so you're looking at the next version coming in probably a month or two. So, you know, these installs are pretty big. This one ended up being 30 gigs when I was done. And so if you're on internet caps or whatever, or you just don't want that space on your machine being taken up or the droppings left behind, you may not want to install it yet. Although the installer, the nice thing about that new updated installation process is it is much more modular, a lot less sloppy than it was before. So you shouldn't have to do 100 million uninstalls like I had to with Visual Studio 2013 or 2015 to get rid of them. So that is one thing in the advantage of going ahead and checking out Visual Studio 2017 now if you want to. Or you can just wait a few weeks for the final release. But I would say it is really improving the Visual Studio issues. I've always loved Visual Studio. It's just that ongoing creeping bloat that's really got me, and what I'm seeing here is a much smoother experience, and where they're moving with this cross-platform integration right out of the box, Linux building right out of the box, support for 20-30 different programming languages out of the box, automatic just opening a directory and having the projects in it, be it a JavaScript project or a CMake C++ project, just work out of the box. It's all really impressive. It's stuff that I really like seeing. So they've done pretty much everything I do want to see. Now, of course, I haven't had a lot of good hands-on time. I don't know how good the C++ 11 and 14 support actually is. I don't know, you know, how well the new refactoring tools work, etc. But from what I'm seeing at a surface level, this is definitely a step in the right direction. And I have trouble saying that 2015, Visual Studio 2015 was an improvement over 2013. I can certainly say that 2017 is an improvement over 2015. All right, hope you found that useful. If you do, please do click like. And if you'd like to see this kind of stuff and developer tutorials, news, and more, please do click subscribe. Hope you found that useful. See you all later. Bye.